It's the gaming industry's biggest week, the Super Bowl of video games. We all know the spectacle, we all know the hype, we all know the scale of E3. A lot of us take the week off from work to watch from home. To some, that's the best seat in the house. To many, that's the only seat in the house to spectate E3. And now this year, E3 has opened up the doors to the public for admission. It's an opportunity that one would never have thought that they would be afforded. But it's a chance that I got. And now with my tiny little YouTube channel, my mission was to film as much footage as I could to bring you my experience, to show you what it's like on the inside of E3, what it's like to be in the biggest city that you've ever been in, to experience things that you may have never experienced before in your life, because that's what happened to me. And I'm going to share that with you. So thank you for coming along, and I do hope you enjoy my journey and my experience of E3. So after weeks of preparations, lining up lodging, travel, correspondence with publishers on whether we could or could not, getting to their press conferences, it was quite the journey to even just start the journey to get to LA. But the day finally came. Waking up at 5 a.m., 2 flights over to Los Angeles, and again, I've never been to a city this big, and you see something like Los Angeles on the movie screen or the television screen, and then you just sort of go about your day and just forget about it. And there's a tangibility that you don't have until you actually go to a place this big. I'm coming from a tiny town in Wisconsin where there's very little poverty, there's very little homelessness. It's not even noticeable. It practically doesn't exist here. But then when you go to LA, everything is huge. The city stretches for as far as the eye can see. Every city block transforms the city into something new. One area is completely industrialized and clean, and then by the time you pass the next city block, it's poverty and run down and stricken with homelessness. And it was really quite baffling and confusing to me that this is a thing that can happen. So I land in LAX, and I'm immediately overwhelmed by how big the airport is, by how big the city is, and how I was even going to get to where I was going to go. I've never ridden an Uber or a Lyft before. What's cool is that the driver was as fascinated with me as I was with everything happening right now, because I'm just completely out of my element. I've never been to a city this big before, and he's asking me all kinds of questions, and he's obviously not from America. And not to mention, it seems like none of them abide the speed limit. All of the Uber drivers that we rode with kind of drive like I play Grand Theft Auto. All gas, all swerve, all brake. But they all have really great conversations. It's really quite crazy. It was about a 30-minute ride from LAX to the LA Convention Center to get my badge, to witness that this was a thing that was really happening. So after I got my badge, it was time to finally go to the Airbnb because it was finally ready. And I met the other guest that we were going with, Crystal Red Punks, who was an absolute riot. Probably the best time that I think I had at E3 was being there with friends. I've known Crystal Red Punks for probably about 10 years, and this is the first time that him and I have met face to face, and it was an utter privilege to do so. The Airbnb was nice. It had 3 bedrooms, it had 2 bathrooms. It was kind of cool, and it had a really tiny TV, but somehow we managed, especially for the press conferences that we couldn't attend, like Microsoft or Sony or Nintendo, that we could all just kind of huddle around this tiny TV and enjoy the shows that we weren't invited to. But it was that night that I would be able to attend my very first press conference. The Bethesda show was about 8 p.m. Pacific time. Upon arrival at the Bethesda show, I noticed that there are 3 separate lines, all kind of in the same area. One line I'm assuming was for like a VIP attendee, the other was for people that had been invited to the show but that needed to pick up a wristband. That would have been my line. But then across the street was a line that pretty much spanned the entire block. And I was a little confused why there were separate lines across the street. So I asked a security rep, and he says, well, that's the line for the hopefuls. And what he meant by that was the line of folks that were hoping to get into the Bethesda conference that did not receive an invite. Just sort of, hey, we got some extra space and you can attend. And so I was curious. I asked a security rep, what are the chances of the folks over there getting into the Bethesda show tonight once everybody else has been admitted? And his answer to me was, you don't want to be in that line, which is unfortunate. You really have to wonder how long those folks have been waiting, considering that line opened up at about 10 a.m. Even more wonderful, almost immediately after that conversation, a white SUV rolls up behind me at the back of the line. And out comes 4 YouTubers, 2 of which I'm not too familiar with, but 2 I'm very familiar with. One being Stat, that's with a 5, not an S. He's a pretty cool streamer that streams a lot of popular games, played a lot of No Man's Sky when that was a hot thing. And then I had to do a triple take for this, but right next to him comes out Angry Joe. Nice to meet you, I am a fellow content creator myself. So my choice was to really just sit back and just observe and just kind of see what was going on and maybe engage in conversation in a hopefully not awkward manner. They showed up, and the rule at Bethesda is that everybody had to receive a wristband and be checked by security. With everything going in the world, it was good to know that there was some base level of security at the show. Angry Joe in particular kind of took issue with this.
And the barcode on it to get it in the system.
What is all this barcode nonsense they're doing?
It's security. Yeah, they're kind of doing it.
It's bullshit because I walked through several times and.
Yo, they scan
So
you
this
in
is
and
what
out.
it means.
This
This
doesn't
is line
protect
to
it.
get your
Say.
wristband.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah,
Well,
this is line to get your wristband.
There was a little bit of an exchange with the security rep, and the security rep had to reason with them and that, hey, this is security and they all have to go through this, and even I did. So there was some conversation, and I had kind of a back and forth with Stat because of our coverage of No Man's Sky back in those days, and we had a lot in common. We had a little bit of a banter about the game and how disappointed some folks were, and he was actually particularly fascinated with the camera that I was holding, which was attached to a sort of steadying gimbal. And we sort of talked back and forth about it, and he even gave it a test drive as well.
Hey, how are you? I broke your thing. It turned off. I don't know why it turned off.
Just after that, they conversed within the group on whether they even wanted to stay at the show or not. Their opportunities were wait in line, get into the show, or just go back to the hotel room, get plastered, and watch it online. They didn't stay for very long after that. But before they left, I did have a really cool moment with Angry Joe.
So good luck. And
Jerry, Legacy Zero.
Awesome. I'm gonna be super jealous if they give you anything cool, or you get to see Bethesda Land and ride a carnival. That'd be awesome.
I'll tweet you.
But it's unfortunate though, because I only ended up waiting in line in about 30 to 45 minutes. They might have gotten in within due time. So the line continues to move, and it really wasn't that long, but we were just at about the time where it was beginning to get dark. So by about the time I got in to get my wristband and tell them whether I wanted to drink alcoholic beverages or not, which was kind of an odd question for a conference for me, and I didn't exactly know what was going to be happening. I thought I was going to be led into some building and there was chairs and seating, maybe some swag, etc., but that's not really what happened at all. So I declined the chance to drink, but in hindsight, really, I probably should have taken that. There was yet again another security checkpoint where they actually had to look in my bag to make sure I wasn't packing anything that was going to hurt somebody else. But just after that, what happened after was baffling, wonderful, and confusing. There's this really long stroll down this ramp with a backdrop of this sort of carnival functioning Ferris wheel, a peppy song from the Fallout 4 DLC, namely the Nuka World one. And as I'm getting closer and I'm getting closer to this, the music is obviously louder, there are more people with every step I take, and eventually I end up being shoulder to shoulder with a lot of people. And now, at this point, there's no real way of knowing what I have to do or where I have to go. Am I in the wrong place? Did I show up to a before party before the actual show? What is it I'm supposed to be doing here? So really my choice at that point was to wander aimlessly through the crowd, just taking in the sights. And from left to right, there's sort of these elaborate artistic scenes where there's tables and chairs set up, and there's a bar over here and there's a bar over there, and everybody's got alcoholic beverages except this guy. But one thing I noticed about this is there was a constant flow in one direction of people, which I guess I became a part of. That is, until I came to a dead end. And at this point, I'm a little concerned because maybe I'm in the wrong place. And then just as I'm thinking that, this gigantic wall behind me opens up to yet another ramp. I feel like I'm in the WWE at this point, walking down this ramp to another stage. And as we continue to go down this ramp just instantly fills with people, and we're all crunched together and moving in this one direction, and the music gets louder and louder and louder until you see a massive screen sort of sprawled out left to right. The Bethesda show was comprised of kind of like a rock concert. There was standing room only, but behind everybody in the crowd that were fans and attendees of the show got closest to the stage, while all of the press and the VIP access were in rafters behind us. And this was my chance to get as close to the stage as I possibly could. The music was loud, the smell of reefer is in the air. There was a lot of reefer in the air, and the screen in front of us is playing constant pictures of events and sizzle clips of various games, and it was all very loud. So then the show begins with this sort of climactic countdown. Bethesda had a pretty good show, not a whole lot of new game substance, but Evil Within and the new Colossus looked pretty awesome, so games I'm definitely pretty hyped for. But what I found really funny about the end of the Bethesda show is Pete Hines ends the show, and then right as the cameras turn off, he begins to address the crowd. He doesn't simply just walk off the stage, but rather he's like, okay, so for those of you in attendance, and he had a little bit of a surprise for us. Without much conversation, he invites out to the stage a little more dubstep, courtesy of the Chainsmokers. I took some time to walk around and enjoy the new sort of booths that they just kind of unveiled. They didn't have any gameplay in them, but rather they were just two new bars that they opened up with more alcohol, and all to the blasting sound of dubstep in the background. The next day was also going to be a pretty long day. Day one, Monday. First plan for the day was to head over to the Intel and PC Gamer Show, which we got an invite to. A nice morning trip across downtown to get us to the theater, more sights and spectacle to drink in. There was a fairly short line to get into this particular show because most of the folks had already been let in. Going into the Intel show, it was a pretty nice theater, really colorful, really artsy fartsy and a lot of really cool decor hanging from the ceiling, which I thought was pretty neat. But initially when we got into the building, nobody told us that there was a certain section that anybody should be sitting in at that moment. Intel's show was a whole lot of yelling about how great Intel is, which I kind of agree, and a couple of game demos and VR talk and things like that. Not too remarkable, but the PC Gamer show was directly after that. Tripwire was there. It was a pretty decent show, and it was a good fun too. I really do enjoy the host of the PC Gamer show, even though sometimes he could be cheesy, which is pretty deliberate. So after that show was done, all we needed to do was just take a walk right down the street to the Orpheum Theater for Ubisoft. Again, with multiple lines, one for press access and one for just general attendee, but also there was a rear entrance too to get in, which I thought was kind of cool, and they instantly pointed me to the back of that. Now, if you know me and if you follow me on Twitter, you know I've had some pretty strong things to say about Ubisoft, but this party and then the process of getting invited to their show was really nice, and Ubisoft has done a whole lot of work in the last couple of years to try to spiffy up their image and improve their community feedback and community interaction, and this show was very much a monument to that fact. Food trucks, there was like 3 or 4 of them. There were really cool people with black Ubisoft shirts walking around. I don't know how anybody was wearing black in the direct sun like they were, because it had to have been cooking. But everybody was nice and upbeat. There were burly gentlemen with little bottles of water tossing them out to attendees outside because they knew how hot it was. And this was before the show was even starting. I had my chance to eat actual New York pizza for the first time. Like, it was really good. It was really big and I had to fold it over. But it was probably some of the most tasty pizza I've had in a long time. And just as I was getting done with my pizza, the 2 gentlemen tossing bottles of water at people began to wave us all in. It was time for everybody to get seated for the show. So upon entry into the Orpheum, it was immediate that this was a Ubisoft party. There's light projections of their new logo on the wall. There's more Ubi staff walking around with nice cool shirts, and they're all very pretty and they're very well styled, and I thought this was really neat. But I had absolutely nowhere that I knew I had to go. Most of the downstairs of the Orpheum was already taken. So I walked down to some of the staff that was pretty close to the stage to find out kind of where I could go to sit, as I was invited by the Far Cry community to get into the Ubisoft presser. And almost immediately I was recognized by about 4 of the Far Cry members that were already there that were invited by Ubisoft as well. Sadly, there wasn't any space for me there, so I had to move up to the top where I had probably maybe even the better view. As I'm trying to find my way up to the balcony, you can still hear the pre-show echoing in the background of various developers and community developers sort of talking their way through their games or having a nice interview with people that were running the show. Sadly, no Aisha Tyler this year. They took more of a focus to just focus on their games this year without much of a host, which in hindsight now is actually probably the better idea. It was hot in this building though. You could immediately tell that all of the heat from the people below you was rising up and heating up the top of the building, which is pretty much where I was, but I still appreciated my view. A lot would say that Ubisoft came away as the best press conference of the year, with some of the best game reveals of the year too. Ubisoft was really humble this year, put a lot of focus on their players and their fans and their interactions with their intellectual property. And Ubisoft, I don't know what's made them make this change, but it makes me feel very positive about them, even in my past years of criticizing them heavily. And I only criticized Ubisoft ever was because I love at least 2 or 3 of their intellectual property. They take risks and they let developers do a majority of the things that they want to do with those franchises, new IPs, indie developers. And they really came out and showed just game after game that was interesting and compelling and showed really well. Miyamoto was on stage. There was a little bit of a cringy interaction between Miyamoto and Yves Guillemot, which was I don't know, it was kind of classic. There was a creator of the Mario vs. Rabbids game was in full-blown waterworks, proud of his accomplishment. But what you see through the live streams of these shows is you see cringe, and you see things that you might call, oh, this is terrible. But I would say that when you're in the audience, it's a little different, because it's almost when they're doing those things, they're almost pandering directly to you. In that room, there is an applause and there is an energy where maybe at that moment you may not have felt the same cringe when Miyamoto and Guillemot were interacting with each other in such an awful, or not awful, but an awkward way, which came across really as deliberate. And you can't help but smile at the cool poses that they were doing with those rabid guns, and it's gonna be a pretty cool memory of mine that I keep for a long time. Just after the show was let out, I had to find my way out, because at this point everybody in the theater is trying to flood out of the theater. Not to mention I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because I'm up top, so now I have to navigate everybody upstairs, climb down the stairs, and get down. But when I noticed that I can look over the balcony at this sort of navigational way to get in and out of the building, it's clogged with people, but also in that region is where Ubisoft is handing out handbags of swag, which was interesting because as I could look down and witness this, those bags of swag are quickly disappearing. People are swarming these tables like piranha, and these bags are disappearing quickly. I have to find a way to get down and get a hold of one of these bags, but I was kind of feeling a little desperate for it. As I made my way down and I'm about 3 feet away from the table, they hand out their last bags, and I felt a little sink in my heart right here. But then just moments later, here comes 2 more representatives with more bags to accommodate the folks that hadn't had them yet. Oh, crisis averted. Upon exiting the Orpheum Theater, I ran into those Far Cry folks again, and they were really nice fellas. I was able to shoot the breeze with them for a little bit before heading on to my next destination, which was Starbucks. I hadn't had coffee in like 2 days. It was certainly time. So after all that, it was time to head back to the Airbnb for some food and rest and relaxation, in time for the Sony Conference that was going to be happening in about 4 hours after that. I wasn't able to get invited to that show, so we all just sat back and chilled at the place while we watched it live on YouTube and just enjoyed it from there. After that, it was a movie and some relaxation to prepare for the next day. Day 1, the show floor. Waking up the next morning, we all had quite a bit of time to get ready, have some breakfast, and just sort of plan the day out, because we really didn't have much of an idea of what we were going to be doing. We knew where we had to go, which was the business line, but we wasn't sure where that was located or what we had to do to get in. But once we got to the convention center, it was all pretty clear. Again, the Uber rides from our place to the convention center was always entertaining, and of course with the 3 of us in there, it was just a riot the whole way. You almost hoped that that kind of ride just wouldn't end. Getting to the convention center, it was clear what opening E3 to the public was going to be like. As a matter of fact, there was a line that stretched all the way out of the front door and wrapped around the building and went behind the building. And just sort of taking it all in, these folks were all waiting there for way longer than we had just arrived, and these folks had been here for a while. And this wasn't the only line. We walked in through the front door, and immediately it hits you. This is it. You are at E3. If it hasn't done that before with the press conferences, if you're lucky enough to get into them, now you're in the spectacle. Now you're in the crowd. Now here's where all the big magic happens. At least that's what you think at first. Everything is big. There's statues, there's gigantic things floating from the ceiling. You're walking by people that you've seen on the internet for years, and you pass by them like, hey, that's Danny O'Dwyer from NoClip and GameSpot just walked by me casually. So we make our way upstairs where the business lounge and the business line are located. Grab a quick coffee, grab a quick breakfast, and we find our way to the business line expecting it to be long. There was only about 3 people in the line, which was really good for us because when the line opens, we have first dibs right into the show floor. So at that point, it was plan the attack. Where do we go first that we can make sure we have first dibs on before anybody else gets into the center? Crystal Red Punks, he picked the Microsoft booth, and I picked the Ubisoft booth. All of them directly in front of us. As soon as the doors open, it's directly to the Ubisoft booth. Running into the convention center and onto the show floor, there were barely any people there. As a matter of fact, the only people that were there were sort of VIP or press that were allowed to be there before the general public were allowed to go in. Going into the Ubisoft booth was a bit confusing at first because I made a beeline right for the Far Cry booth to try to get some hands on with Far Cry 5, a game that I'm pretty interested in for this, or at least for next year. But they kind of looked at me funny as if they didn't know why I was there. I had my badge, but according to them, I had to have a wristband from Ubisoft before I can get in to play the games. But when I asked them how I would get there, they didn't know. So I had to ask around at multiple booths on finding out where I get this wristband to get entry, because the idea is they wanted to scan this wristband for your entry. Then you play the game and then they scan it again to give you points towards something like in-game unlocks as thanks for coming to the show floor to play their games. Finally, I figured it out myself. There was a little booth in the middle of the Ubisoft booth where you go to give your email and information and get your wristband so you can be able to go in any one of the Ubisoft booths there is to play their games. I'm one of the first in line for the Far Cry booth. And I go in and it's really cool because they sit you down and you put on a set of headphones, and then there's a community developer standing right there as you're playing the game, and he's talking to you through your headset to sort of talk to you about the game and how you're enjoying E3 so far, and to help you understand what it is you're playing in case you get confused or if you need directions, or even if you want to ask them. And as part of the Far Cry community, I like to make maps in their map editor, but sadly, they wouldn't give me any information about the map editor and its multiplayer relationship, which kind of soured my experience from Far Cry 4 that didn't have a relationship between the two at all. But unfortunately, this dev was pretty cagey about giving me information and said that they would reveal it at a later date. Right after that, I moved over to the Rainbow Six Siege booth to have a chat with their community developer over there, and also get a mention with some of the local folks. So that was the extent of my Ubisoft booth experience, because I'm not a huge fan of Assassin's Creed, and it was time to walk around the show floor and experience some of the happenings around the South Hall and the West Hall. All two very different halls with two different experiences almost entirely. Crystal Red Punks had finished up his experience at the Microsoft booth. He got to play Sea of Thieves and one other game I can't remember, but he had a great time as well, and he's really excited for Sea of Thieves, and frankly, so am I. We get together and wander around the show floor for a bit, capturing the sights and the clogged up atmosphere, because at this point, just after we were let in, the place opened up and the actual show floor flooded as if there was a gigantic leak somewhere. People rushed through the doors, filling every crevice of the building around us. It was pretty nuts. We got to go around and take a look at the various booths. Indie booths, there were booths for peripheral makers and chair makers, heavy focus on streamers and content creators. I even hunted down my good pal and No Man's Sky fellow streamer on YouTube, Syrian Gaming, and kinda shocked him. It's nice to know my element of surprise was intact. We sat around, talked with Syrian for a bit, and then went about our way again. We visited the food trucks, which were really good. Probably the best BLT I've had in a very long time. Everything is loud, everything is stuffy, it's crowded, and the lines were pretty crazy. As a matter of fact, looking at the lines, some of the most popular lines, particularly Bethesda's lines for Wolfenstein, for example, was cut off at about 6 to 8 hours wait, and we won't even get to Nintendo. Visually, everything is overwhelming. There's stimuli coming from every corner, flashing lights, moving screens, people on stages talking to crowds or talking to anything, smoke machines billowing out smoke from every corner. There was even a live band just playing music from Nintendo. Wandering the show floor was a blast, and we really weren't going to have much time to be able to stand in any lines because at this point lines were pretty much cut off. There were so many people in the building that really a lot of the developers and publishers were putting a limit to how many people could be in a line. For the sake of, it was pretty much hopeless at that point, considering the building was closing at 5 or 6. Nintendo had to completely restructure the way they were doing things on day 2, and unfortunately, Sony's booth was pretty unattainable considering there was no line, but they required you to RSVP through a PlayStation E3 Experience app that only opened up at certain times, and when it did for people to pick their slots, the app would close up tight and refuse to function. The rest of our day was pretty much made up of wandering the show floor, talking to various developers and showing up at various booths to talk about different things. We stopped by the Killing Floor booth. The Tripwire guys are fantastic. And after that, it was pretty much time to go. So we went back, got some R&R, checked out a movie, got some DoorDash, and it was a good, relaxing evening for the rest of that evening. Because tomorrow was going to be another day of hitting up booths and pulling in the sights. Upon arriving at day 2, we had already had a plan in place. The same thing as yesterday, but to attack it from a different angle. This time, we were going to visit the Activision booth. Our hopes were to get in and play Call of Duty and Destiny, but those hopes were dashed the minute we got in line. The doors opened, we rushed right towards the Activision booth. The line started and lasted for quite a while. We ended up waiting for roughly about 45 minutes before we can even get our hands on with Call of Duty World War II. But actually the experience of waiting at the Activision booth was actually pretty fun. After waiting in line, you're put through a sequence of rooms where there's sort of inspirational World War II music. There's the sound of paid actors talking to you, and in the very last room that we came across, we filled the room up, and there was this sort of paid actor. It was a drill sergeant who was yelling at us and giving us orders and telling us how that we were going to attack and how we were going to use teamwork and etc., etc. And he made us say hoo-ah a lot.
We're going to be in their trenches. We're going to be in their bunker. Enemy will surround all of us, so you must stick together. This will be your first taste of combat. Take it all in. You not scared yet, are you? Let me repeat myself. This will be your first taste of combat. So it's very important to trust. It's very important to trust your training, trust your skill set, and rely on one another to keep pushing forward. And that's point too hard.
And actually particularly funny was he kept picking on this one guy because this guy kept giving him a hard time, trying to get him to break character for a majority of our visit in that room, and he just wasn't having it.
Because the fate of the world depends on us. Turn off the phone. It's not Back to the Future.
Hey, yo.
What's up, backpack? You guys in the battle. You scared? No, you look cool. You alright? Can I get a hoorah? Hoorah! Yeah!
After a shorter wait, just after that, it was finally time to lead us up to the platform to get hands-on with the new Call of Duty. And I was kind of impressed because being a detractor of Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, which was an absolute dumpster fire, it was nice to get a hold of something that felt down to earth again and felt classic again. And of course, I'm a huge lover of World War II, so they've already got me in their pocket there. It was a good experience, played good, war mode was fantastic, and overall, it was pretty fun to play. I'm gonna keep my eyes out on that one. By that time, we looked at the Destiny line just across the way, and it was pretty much hopeless at that point. The lesson that we learned this time was that you get to the beginning, you find what you want, and then the choice is to wait there all day or don't. More of the same this day just after was being able to get to have an opportunity to interact with people, talk with people, and get a good sense of interaction from them. Other players, other fans, other people that may not have ever thought they would have the chance to come to a show like this, and it was pretty exciting to be able to do that. Upon exiting the building for day 2, and the final day there, for me unfortunately, was the ability to notice that there was World War II planes flying over, and as I'm filming around there, right in front of me is Glenn Schofield and Michael Condrey, and I don't even notice because I'm too busy moving my camera around to notice that they are there, and I unfortunately didn't get an opportunity to meet them or shake their hands or talk to them about the project, and I didn't realize that I actually had them on film directly in front of me until after I got home to look at it. It's quite embarrassing actually. I unfortunately didn't get to attend E3 for the 3rd day because I had to be directly out and on a flight to Orlando straight the next morning, so it was back to the Airbnb with my buddies for another movie and a good meal and some good hearty laughter, and I really enjoyed that. E3 was an exciting time. The entire thing was just a wonderful experience, and I really recommend it, that if you can actually get the chance to go, if they open up the doors to the public again next year, just know that it's not as easy as one would think. That there is a lot of standing and walking, only to play maybe 1-2 games that day if you're lucky, unless they find a better way to go about it, which it's hard to say that they ever will. But that's really it. If you're there for the spectacle. You're there for the conferences, if you can get in. And you're there for the fellowship with fellow gamers and fellow fans that want to interact with you and interact with developers. And I really can say now that I have fully experienced, at least for the most part, E3. Some of the lessons I learned that maybe I could have been, I'm pretty sure that I would have been eligible for a press pass. Maybe I should have submitted for that. I kind of kicking myself for that now because maybe that would have gotten me better access. And of course, I've learned better ways to connect with developers, to be able to meet and talk with them at the show, and that's really important. And I learned a thing or two about networking as well. So that should be something, if you consider going to E3, maybe look into figuring out how to do that, or talking to other people that have gone to the show before to learn some best practices before you get out there to be most effective. I'm carrying away a lot of memories from this experience. Meeting one of my best friends for the first time face to face, a guy that I've known for a decade now. Experiencing a large city, larger than I've ever imagined, filled with many cultures, many surprises. Every city block is different. The food was delicious. The smog is very real. People were very friendly. The Uber rides were like amusement rides, and E3 was just as astounding and amazing as I imagined it would be. So here's hoping for another chance to experience the spectacle and the hype of it all, more personal, more up close, better than any YouTube stream could ever provide you. The sights, the sound, the smell, and the wonder that is E3. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more content in the future, go ahead and subscribe, and I'd be happy to see you later.